August 19, 1942. Deep within the choking green heart of Guadalcanal, the silence of the jungle was broken by the cautious footsteps of Compania, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. Sweat-drenched and rifle-ready, they pushed forward along a muddy coastal trail toward Coley Point, each man tense, every shadow a possible death. Leading them was Captain Charles H. Brush, a seasoned officer with a mind sharpened by combat and a heart heavy with responsibility. As the Marines advanced, local whispers of a looming Japanese threat haunted the thick underbrush. One of the most trusted voices among them, Father Arthur Damel, a Catholic priest stationed on the island, had warned of increased enemy movement. Allied coast watchers soon confirmed it. The Japanese had established a clandestine radio outpost near Taivu, closely monitoring every Marine maneuver. Realizing the threat, Captain Brush was ordered to lead a 60-man unit to eliminate the post. It wasn't just about silence, it was about survival. As the sun climbed mercilessly overhead, the Marines paused beneath a stand of fruit trees for rest. It was then that fate struck. Ahead, a patrol of Japanese soldiers appeared relaxed, unalert, unaware they were walking into a trap. Brush didn't hesitate. In a matter of seconds, he ordered a two-pronged assault. While the main body engaged the enemy head-on, a flanking platoon slid through the jungle to strike from the side. The ambush was swift and brutal. By the time the smoke cleared, 31 Japanese lay dead. The Marines suffered 3 fatalities and 3 wounded, but what came next changed everything. Among the fallen enemy were officers dressed immaculately fresh uniforms, polished gear, high ranks. They hadn't been on the island long. But more than their appearance, it was what they carried that shocked the Marines. Detailed maps, troop movement plans, and vulnerabilities of Marine defenses, especially around Henderson Field. Captain Brush understood the weight of this intelligence. A runner was dispatched immediately, carrying the documents through hostile terrain back to headquarters. Guadalcanal was not just another jungle-covered island. Stretching 90 miles long and 25 miles wide, it held the key to controlling the Solomon Islands, and ultimately, the Pacific. The Americans had landed on August 7, 1942. Their initial success was swift, capturing a critical airstrip. It was renamed Henderson Field, honoring Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine pilot killed at Midway. But while the main island fell with little resistance, the real struggle raged on nearby islets like WW2 and Tanambogo, where Marine raiders and paratroopers met ferocious, almost suicidal resistance. Japanese soldiers shouted insults in perfect English across the battlefield, attempting to rattle American morale. But these tactics only steeled the resolve of the Marines, who watched as the enemy fought and died with grim fanaticism. Then came the night of August 9th. As the Marines entrenched themselves in the sweltering heat, the Japanese Navy launched a punishing surprise attack in the waters off Savo Island. Allied naval forces, American, British, and Australian, were caught off guard. The Japanese, masters of night combat, decimated them. When dawn broke, the truth hit hard. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner informed General Alexander Vandegrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, that Allied naval forces would withdraw. The Marines were alone. Worse still, only half of the needed supplies had been unloaded. With no naval gunfire support and dwindling food, ammunition, and medical resources, the Marines braced for what felt like abandonment. But their presence had already disrupted Japan's plans to seize New Guinea, and they weren't about to give up now. Far away in Rabaul, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding the Japanese 17th Army, prepared a counter-strike. Despite his scholarly demeanor, Hyakutake was a master strategist. He underestimated only one thing: the American will to fight. Believing the Marines would falter in the unforgiving jungle climate, Hyakutake dispatched a 6,000-man task force to crush Henderson Field. But he didn't count on U.S. code breakers in Washington, Hawaii, and Australia, quietly intercepting and decoding his communications. Even before the Japanese could land, U.S. intelligence had already warned General Vandegrift. Back at HQ, the documents were covered by Captain Brush's men arrived in the hands of Captain Sherwood Moran, a division intelligence officer fluent in Japanese and well-versed in enemy strategy. What he read confirmed their worst fears. The Japanese had recently arrived from Truk, fresh troops, ready for battle. But there was no clarity on the exact size or tactics of the impending attack. Vandegrift had to make a fateful choice: strike first, or dig in and defend. With supplies low and time against them, he made the hard call: hold the perimeter. Prepare for the assault. Part 2. The Hunters and the Hunted. Voice-over begins. Narrator. As the sun rose on June 4, 1942, the waters of the Pacific shimmered with a deceptive calm. But beneath this surface brewed one of the most pivotal naval battles in history, the Battle of Midway. For Japanese aircraft carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu formed the deadly spearhead of Admiral Nagumo's strike force. Each vessel bristled with aircraft, armed to crush Midway and any resistance that dared to surface. But Admiral Nagumo did not know that the Americans were already there watching, waiting. Short dramatic pause. The American carriers USS Enterprise, USS Yorktown, and USS Hornet under the overall command of Admiral Chester W. Nimitz and frontline commanders like Admirals Spruance and Fletcher had taken a position northeast of Midway. With intelligence from cracked Japanese codes, they had guessed Nagumo's timing almost precisely. The Hunters were about to become the hunted. Sound of carrier planes revving up early in the morning. Japanese aircraft took off in waves, roaring toward Midway to begin their initial assault. Bombs rained down on the atoll, setting fuel depots ablaze and damaging American airstrips. But the U.S. response came swiftly. From Midway's own airfield, Marine pilots scrambled into the sky. Flying outdated aircraft and heavily outnumbered, they launched a valiant but doomed attack against the Japanese fleet. Brief silence for respect. They were cut down mercilessly. Many never returned. Yet their sacrifice had purpose. It kept the Japanese defenses distracted. Meanwhile, the American carrier-base aircraft were closing in. From hundreds of miles away, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighter escorts took off, heading into the unknown. And this is where fate, the unquantifiable variable in any battle, took over. Transition music cue. The first American torpedo squadrons arrived, one after another, without coordination or escort. Like sitting ducks, they dove at the Japanese carriers. Japanese Zero fighters descended upon them with deadly accuracy. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the USS Hornet was wiped out to the last man, except for one ensign George Gay. Floating in the water, he would become a living witness to the events about to unfold. Next came Torpedo Squadron 6 and 3. The result was the same decimation, but then it happened. Voice lowers in tone. While the Japanese were preoccupied with these low-flying torpedo bombers, their protective fighter screen was pulled out of position. Anti-aircraft guns remained focused downward. That's when the U.S. dive bombers arrived. Flying at altitude and previously lost, these planes from the Enterprise and Yorktown stumbled upon the Japanese fleet at the perfect moment. Below them, the Japanese carriers were completely vulnerable, decks cluttered with refueling and rearming planes, bombs scattered about, and hangars full of aviation fuel. Brief dramatic pause. It was a textbook setup for annihilation. At 10:22 a.m., the American bombers dove. Screaming down from the sky at 70-degree angles, they released their bombs with precision and vengeance. Within minutes, the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were engulfed in flames. The decks erupted in a series of fiery explosions as fuel and ordnance detonated like fireworks from hell. Sound of explosions and chaos. Japanese sailors leapt into the sea to escape the inferno, while the fleet scrambled to mount damage control efforts. But it was too late. The blow had been struck and it was devastating. Pause for emotional effect, but the battle was not over. From the surviving carrier Hiryu, Admiral Yamaguchi launched a desperate counterattack. Japanese dive bombers homed in on the USS Yorktown, catching the Americans momentarily off guard. Explosions rocked the Yorktown as she took to direct hits, Flames shot skyward. Damage control parties fought back bravely, saving the ship from immediate sinking. But Hiryu's second wave found her again. This time, torpedoes slammed into the Yorktown's hull. She began to list heavily. Her fate was sealed. The Americans had lost a carrier, but the Japanese were about to lose everything. As 1944 began, the skies over Europe were still a dangerous place for Allied bombers. Although missions deep into Germany were increasing, the losses remained staggering. American bomber crews lived in constant fear of German flak, swift Messerschmitts, and the agile Focke-Wulf 190s. Each bombing run was a gamble, one where entire squadrons could vanish into smoke and fire before reaching their targets. But a change was coming. With the arrival of the P-51 Mustang in large numbers, the rules of the air war began to shift dramatically. The Mustang's arrival wasn't just a new addition to the arsenal, it was a revolution. For the first time, bomber crews had an escort that could stay with them all the way into Germany and back. No more were the bombers left alone in the deadliest part of their journey. The P-51's long-range capabilities, thanks to its drop tanks, allowed it to fly farther than any other Allied fighter. It could accompany B-17s and B-24s all the way to Berlin, a distance previously unthinkable for fighter escorts. Suddenly, the Luftwaffe was not facing helpless bomber formations, it was up against squadrons of Mustangs ready to fight. The impact was immediate and devastating for the Germans. Mustang pilots began hunting enemy aircraft aggressively, rather than passively escorting. They took the fight to the Luftwaffe. German interceptors that once attacked bombers freely now had to deal with skilled Mustang pilots on their tails. The Mustangs weren't just defenders, they were hunters. One of the turning points came during Big Week in February 1944. The Allies launched a massive aerial assault on the German aircraft industry. Thousands of bombers flew missions over key factories, and this time they were protected by hundreds of P-51s. The Luftwaffe responded with everything it had, but it wasn't enough. The Mustangs tore through the German fighters. Dozens of enemy planes were downed each day. The German aircraft industry was severely damaged, and more importantly, the Luftwaffe began to lose its most experienced pilots, veterans who couldn't be replaced quickly. The P-51 Mustang was proving to be more than just an escort. It was becoming a symbol of American air power, a sleek, fast, deadly force that changed the game. Pilot morale skyrocketed. Mustang squadrons developed their own identities, often decorating their aircraft with fierce artwork and nicknames. Some of the most famous squadrons, like the Blue-Nosed Bastards of Bodny, became legends. But for all their fame, these pilots knew the risks. Air combat was unforgiving. Even the best could be shot down in an instant. Still, they flew day after day, mission after mission. Their courage wasn't in their speed or firepower, but in their willingness to face death at 20,000 feet, over hostile territory, to protect others. One group that etched its name into history while flying P-51s was the Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American military aviators in the U.S. Armed Forces. Fighting against prejudice and segregation at home, they proved their skill and bravery in the skies of Europe. Flying red-tailed Mustangs, they developed a reputation for staying close to the bombers and rarely losing any under their protection. Their performance shattered racist myths and opened doors for future generations. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was reeling. The skies that once belonged to German fighters were now under constant Mustang patrol. Bombers could finally strike Germany's heart with far fewer losses. The strategic bombing campaign, now with real teeth, began to cripple the Nazi war machine. Factories couldn't operate at full capacity. Fuel refineries were in flames. Railroads were bombed, cutting off supplies. The Allies had achieved air superiority and the P-51 Mustang was at the forefront. Beyond Europe, the Mustang also saw action in the Pacific. Modified versions operated from remote airstrips and island bases, pushing back against the Japanese air threat. While the distances and environment were different, the Mustang's role remained the same: dominate the skies, escort the bombers, and strike the enemy with precision. As the war raged on, the Mustang evolved. It adapted to new missions, including ground attack and reconnaissance. But its greatest legacy was in the role it was born to play: air superiority. The P-51 didn't just protect bombers. It gave the Allies control of the skies. Back home, the Mustang became a symbol of hope. Newspaper headlines boasted of its victories. Young boys carved models of it. Factory workers building Mustangs in Detroit and Los Angeles felt pride, knowing their hands were shaping the very planes that turned the tide in Europe. The roar of the Mustang engine was the sound of victory in the making. Yet, for all its success, the cost was high. Thousands of pilots didn't return. Many Mustangs were lost. Each mission carried the weight of lives at stake. The freedom to fly over Berlin came not just from superior engineering, but from unmatched bravery. By late 1944, with the skies increasingly under Allied control, the final phase of the European air war began. Germany's industrial base was crumbling. The Luftwaffe, once proud and dominant, was now a shadow of its former self. The P-51 Mustang had done its job and done it with thunder, but the war wasn't over, and the Mustang still had a final role to play in the ultimate assault on Nazi Germany. By mid-1945, Japan's military machine was running on fumes. Cities had been reduced to ashes, industries destroyed, and the population demoralized. Yet, the kamikaze spirit still lingered, an ember of defiance that refused to die. New waves of suicide missions were launched as American forces closed in on Japan's home islands. During the Battle of Okinawa, one of the bloodiest and most pivotal campaigns of the Pacific War, kamikaze pilots played a central role. Over 1,500 kamikaze attacks were launched during this battle alone, resulting in the sinking or damaging of dozens of Allied ships. But this time, the American fleet was better prepared, with radar-guided defenses and improved coordination to counter the aerial suicide waves. Still, the kamikaze attacks inflicted psychological terror. Sailors aboard American ships lived with the constant fear of sudden death descending from the sky. They watched helplessly as friends were consumed in flames, while the sky rained steel and fire. Behind the scenes, Japan's leadership was locked in a desperate debate: continue the war and risk total annihilation, or surrender unconditionally. Some generals believed mass suicide was more honorable than defeat. They considered training civilians, women and children, for suicide charges with bamboo spears in case of an American invasion. Then came the turning point that changed everything. On August 6, 1945, the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb devastated Nagasaki. The world had never witnessed destruction on such a scale. Over 200,000 people, mostly civilians, died within weeks. These bombings shattered any illusions of a glorious last stand. The kamikaze spirit, once seen as divine sacrifice, now seemed powerless against the sheer force of nuclear fire. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addressed the nation via radio, announcing Japan's surrender, the first time his voice had ever been heard by his people. For the surviving kamikaze pilots who had trained but never launched, emotions were complex: shame, relief, confusion. Their sacrifice had been rendered moot in the face of a weapon unlike any the world had ever known. The story of the kamikaze did not end in glory, nor in total defeat. It ended in silence, a sobering lesson about the human cost of blind obedience, fanatic nationalism, and war. Today, in Japan, kamikaze pilots are remembered with mixed emotions, some as tragic heroes, others as victims of militarist ideology. Their letters, poems, and diaries, filled with sorrow, duty, and hope for peace, serve as haunting reminders of a generation sacrificed in the name of empire. The winds of war have long since faded, but the echoes of the kamikaze still whisper across the skies of the Pacific.